Grace and peace to you from Onalaska First United Methodist Church. You're listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoy. I've said several times on Facebook, this may be the most important sermon I will ever preach. It's certainly the hardest. As I was sitting here, I got a little notification on my watch. It said, "Your heart rate is extra high and you don't seem active. What is going on?" I have a confession to make this morning. My confession is this: I'm a racist. Not only am I a racist, but I'm probably also a sexist, a classist, a heterosexist, and any other ists you can think of that may or may not have names. Does this confession surprise you this morning? Maybe not. Maybe you're sitting at home going, "No, that doesn't surprise me at all." But if it does surprise you, perhaps it is because, like me up until last week, you have the wrong definition of racism, or at least a gross oversimplification of it. Last week I urged all church members to begin reading a book called White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo. I hope that you have begun to think about doing that. I know that the book is backordered right now everywhere. Everyone is reading it. You can get the audio version. You can also download a digital version, which is what Elaine and I did so that we could begin reading it. But I hope that if you have not ordered one of those versions, or if you've ordered a hard copy and have it on the way, that you would prayerfully consider getting this book. In this book, Dr. DiAngelo says that we white folks, well, we can get pretty uncomfortable talking about racism. It's an uncomfortable topic. It's hard to talk about. And the reason, she says, that it's hard for us to talk about it is because we see it as an individual moral issue. She says this in her book, quote, "In the post-civil rights era, we have been taught that racists are mean people who intentionally dislike others because of their race. Racists are immoral." That is the definition that we have been taught since the civil rights era. And so to suggest that we are racist is deeply offensive, because it is a direct questioning of our morality. Now, let me step back and just say this. For sure, someone who dislikes another person because of their race is a racist. But this definition, I am learning, is too simplistic and it is outdated. In fact, as we speak, Merriam-Webster Dictionary is updating their definition of racism. You see, racism has evolved. It has evolved. It has moved from individual prejudice and individual discrimination as we tend to define it and as we know it, to something much deeper, hidden, dark. In short, racism is a system. Dr. DiAngelo defines racism this way in her book. Quote, "When a racial group's collective prejudice is backed by the power of legal authority and institutional control, it is transformed into racism. a far-reaching system that functions independently from the intentions or self-images of individual actors. That's a long sentence there. But essentially what she's saying is that when one race holds social and institutional power and privilege over another race, that is racism, which means it's not about individuals and individual acts. In fact, it is possible to be against racism, but to still be within a system in which you benefit and another does not. In fact, the system in which you benefit is over and against another race of people. I can't explain it. I have spent 4 years in seminary. I have taken classes on multiculturalism, the church in a multicultural world. I have learned about systems. I have learned about redlining, mass incarceration. I have learned about those things. But it wasn't until I read this new definition that something flipped for me. Something changed in me. Because I had been looking at racism as individual thoughts and actions from people to other individuals. And what Dr. D'Angelo here is saying is that that's actually a problem. We need to shift our thinking when it comes to racism. I cannot explain it, but my eyes have been opened to a new reality. You see, I'm a racist, not because I hate black people or brown people, but because I live and thrive in a society that is tailored toward people who look like me and away from the success of folks that do not look like me. And because I live in this reality every single day, it's the only reality I know since my birth. This benefit, this privilege, this custom tailoring is invisible to me. And I assume that my experience as a person is the same experience that everyone else has. That my white experience is the same as the black experience. But I'm finding that it's not true. Let me widen the scope, because I think racism is such a hot-button issue. It is so hard to talk about. Let me pull the camera back here for just a moment. I want to widen the scope so that you can see what I'm talking about here. Consider this. Here in America, we love chocolate. We eat chocolate. We love our candy bars. We love chocolate-covered almonds. We love, at Easter time, chocolate Easter eggs, chocolate bunnies. We love chocolate. And we consume a lot of chocolate. Did you know that 70% of all chocolate comes from West Africa? And did you know that in West Africa, where 70% of this chocolate comes from, that over 2 million children are forced into slave labor to harvest the cocoa to make that chocolate? And when you go down to the Circle K and you pick up that Hershey bar, or I pick up that Hershey bar, and I pay my $1.25, and I unwrap it, and I eat, and I bite into that chocolate, let me tell you, folks, I don't hate children from West Africa. I just want to enjoy a chocolate bar. I'm guessing you don't hate children from West Africa too. You're not buying that chocolate bar because you have a dislike for children from another country. In fact, you are probably vehemently opposed to child slave labor. Yet you and I benefit from a system that is designed for us, that privileges us, and oppresses them. The cocoa industry is a deep, deep running and hidden system that we do not see, in which we as Americans hold power, the power of the almighty dollar, over children who are powerless. They have no power in the situation. They are forced into this situation, and we benefit from it directly. There is no one single person that makes this system happen. This is not about a powerful individual out there who is pulling strings, who hates children from West Africa. This is a much bigger and far-reaching problem. It's about the demand for chocolate that comes from the U.S. at a certain price point. If I went in and saw that Hershey bar for $10, I'm not going to buy it. I'll buy it for $1.25. It's demand, it's price point, it's the fact that the cocoa grows in West Africa where child labor laws are not enforced. All of that together culminates in this system that is hidden, yet benefits one group of people and oppresses another. Now, what is that ist word? I don't know what that ist word is. Maybe a Westernist? I'm a Westernist? I don't know. But that is a system that you and I are involved in on a regular basis. This is what racism looks like in the U.S. today. And these oppressive systems, they show up in places like wealth distribution, education, housing, incarceration, law enforcement. Particularly law enforcement is the thing that we are talking about right now. This is the thing that is on the news. The media is covering where systems have become a problem within law enforcement. But it's much more than just law enforcement. And the ones that I mentioned are just some, and they are all connected. Deep, hidden, running systems. And the statistics don't lie. Whites as a whole, we have to move away from individual experience, because some white folks have a really hard life. We're not saying that. I'm saying whites as a whole, statistically, do better in all of these categories: wealth distribution, education, housing, incarceration, law enforcement. We do better than blacks. It's a simple fact. My experience is not the same as their experience. I'm going to pick on Levi for just a second here. I told him I was going to do it. He said I could, so I got his permission. A few months ago, Levi was pulled over for speeding right here in Onalaska. We have been warned, and we have warned him, do not speed in Onalaska. They're serious about their speed limits. Levi was going over the speed limit. He got pulled over. A single female officer gave him a ticket that day, and I think he learned a valuable lesson. He hasn't gotten pulled over since. I asked him about that experience. I said, Levi, when the officer approached your vehicle, did she have her gun drawn? Levi laughed and said, no. I said, well, why are you laughing about that? He says, well, there was no reason for her to have her gun drawn. Why would she have her gun drawn? But I asked him that question because around the same time that Levi got pulled over, my colleague, Jason Copes, also got pulled over in Onalaska for speeding. Now, Jason is a black pastor over at Huntsville, FUMC. And he was traveling through Onalaska with his wife and kids. And he was in his father-in-law's truck, which he self-described as ghetto. It's a ghetto truck with wide rims and chrome on it. And Jason was speeding just like Levi. But when Jason got pulled over, the first thing they did was call for backup. Once the backup arrived, the next thing that happened was 2 officers approached the truck with their weapons drawn. You can probably imagine Jason was scared to death. He has seen the news. He knows what can happen in situations like this. His children were in the back seat. Now, once the officers found out that Jason was a Methodist pastor, just passing through town, they holstered their weapons, they gave him a warning, and they let him go. But Jason was shaken, and he immediately reached out to me. Now, when Jason's senior pastor over in Huntsville called the Onalaska Police Department to get an explanation, they said, "We're just following our policy. And let us remind you, we did not give him a ticket. We let him go. No harm, no foul." But the harm was already done. Folks, let me tell you this. If an Onalaska police officer ever approached me or my family with weapons drawn, you better believe I would be in the mayor's office the next day demanding his job. Unacceptable. That would never happen to me. In fact, not once in my life have I ever been afraid of the police. Ever. I've been pulled over many times. I have never been afraid of the police. In fact, when I was a kid, the standard protocol, you meet the officer halfway between the vehicles. When you get pulled over, you get out of your vehicle and you walk back like a man. And you shake the officer's hand. "What's the problem, officer?" That's how I grew up. That's my understanding of the police. I may get a ticket, but I'm not afraid for my life. But Jason was afraid that day. My experience is not the experience of black folks. And let me tell you this. Let me just back this up, because in the media, in the news, we love to talk about good cops versus bad apples. And we just got to get rid of the bad apples. We need better training. Let me tell you something. The officers that pulled Jason over that day, they may or may not have been personally, individually prejudiced or racist. I don't know them. As they said, they were just following policy and procedure. Let me tell you, the problem is not the officers that pulled Jason over that day and the intent of their heart. The problem are the policies and procedures that are in place. Their policies benefit me, but oppress others. And I'm just going to say it. Their policies are racist. So how are you feeling right about now? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Are you feeling defensive? Angry? Is your watch telling you that your heart rate is extra high? Perhaps that's because you're still defining racism wrong. It's very hard to switch race. Just the word racist, race, brings up all kinds of feelings. And Dr. D'Angelo is trying to shift our thinking so that we can have these conversations without getting defensive. You see, to be privileged, it's not a bad thing in itself. And racism as a system is not an attack on individual moral behavior any more than eating a Hershey's bar reflects our feelings about children in West Africa. Do you understand what I'm saying? We're talking about systems. And to be a part of these systems is not reflecting on our individual moral behavior. Just like eating a Hershey's bar doesn't reflect how we feel about children in West Africa. However, once you become aware of the systems, that's a different story. Because at that point, I believe the Spirit of Christ demands a response. When you become aware of the problem, of the system in which you have been benefiting and others oppressed, you have to do something. Now, the Apostle Paul was very aware of his privilege. He had privilege, and he used it to his advantage. I want to read a rather long text to you today from Acts chapter 16. This is a very familiar story. You'll know it as soon as I read it, but I want to read it to you in its entirety. This is Acts chapter 16, starting in verse 16. One day, as we were going to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune-telling. While she followed Paul and us, she would cry out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God who proclaim to you a way of salvation." She kept doing this for many days. But Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her," and it came out that very hour. But when her owners saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, "These men are disturbing our city. They are Jews and are advocating customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to adopt or observe." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was an earthquake so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer woke up and saw the prison doors wide open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, since he supposed that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." The jailer called for lights, and rushing in, he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They answered, "Believe on the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." They spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. At the same hour of the night, he took them and washed their wounds, and then he and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought them up into the house and set food before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God. Now when morning came, the magistrates sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported the message to Paul, saying, "The magistrates sent word to let you go. Therefore come out now and go in peace." But Paul replied, "They have beaten us in public, uncondemned men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And now they are going to discharge us in secret? Certainly not. Let them come and take us out themselves." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them. And they took them out and asked them to leave the city. And after leaving the prison, they went to Lydia's home. And when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed. You see, in this time, Roman citizens were afforded certain privileges that were not given to Jews. It just so happens that Paul and Silas were both Roman citizens and Jews. And so as I read through this story with my new eyes, things jumped out to me that I had never seen before. think we can learn 4 things from this. First and foremost, Paul knew that he was privileged. He knew that he had the privilege. We must know that we are privileged, that we have certain benefits. The problem is, it's all we know. And so it's nearly impossible to see unless someone points it out to you who doesn't have the same experience. So first and foremost, we need to listen. We need to be humble and listen and learn about our experience as opposed to people of color. Number 2, we need to always be in the business of standing up for those who are oppressed, even if it makes people mad at you. Paul turned around and freed that young slave girl who was being held captive for profit. And that made her owners mad, and they seized them. They were not happy. But Paul didn't care because he's in the business of freeing the oppressed. And so we need to be in that same business. Number 3, sometimes it's best practice to lay down your privilege so that you can stand in solidarity with those who don't have it. As soon as Paul and Silas were dragged before the police, he could have said, I'm a Roman citizen. You can't treat me that way. I have certain rights and privileges. But they didn't do that. Instead, they took the beating. They were stripped. They took the jail time. And in doing so, not only did they encourage the other prisoners who were there, but the guard was brought to the faith, he and his entire family, because they chose to lay down their privilege and stand in solidarity with those who were oppressed. But number 4, it's good to use your privilege to hold others accountable. Because when the magistrates decided to let Paul and Silas go, Paul and Silas said, No. We're not going anywhere. We have been wronged. We are Roman citizens. You need to come and admit what you did and apologize. These 4 things, which I think are very much connected to what we are talking about today, jumped out at me in this text. You see, by knowing you are privileged, using it to free others, laying it down to suffer with the oppressed, and picking it back up to hold those in power accountable, you are doing the work of God. You are doing the work that it will take to dismantle systemic racism. I chose Psalm 16. Elena read it to you earlier. David wrote this psalm, and I chose it because David says in the psalm, the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I have a good heritage. I think David's eyes were open, and mine are beginning to open. I'm beginning to see that my lot in life, my life, has been advantaged simply because I was born white. And again, we have to move away from individual. I know I'm using myself as an individual example here. I know that there are people in the white community that have very, very hard lives. I'm not saying that you don't. But what I'm saying is that there are certain things that I am still learning about. I am still listening. But things that are afforded to me from day one because of the color of my skin that I'm not even aware of. And those are pleasant Those boundary lines are pleasant places. It's a good heritage, only if it's used the right way. C.S. Lewis famously said that when you encounter Jesus in the Scriptures, when you hear the words of Jesus, you have three options, and only three options. Number one, Jesus is a liar. Or, number two, Jesus is a lunatic. Or three, Jesus is Lord. As followers of Jesus, we believe he is Lord. But I was thinking about that famous statement from C.S. Lewis, and I thought, we are right now, right here in this country, encountering the voice of the collective black community. We are encountering statistics. Not that these voices haven't been there. They've been there for 400 years. The statistics have always been there. But we are encountering them perhaps in new and fresh ways. Black infant mortality rates are higher on the whole than whites. Black neighborhoods have lower home values on the whole than whites. Black schools have lower test scores and lower graduation rates than whites. There is a disproportionate percentage of blacks in incarceration, in jails. When we encounter the voice of the black people in protests and in these statistics, we have four options. C.S. Lewis gave us three for Jesus. I say we have four for this pandemic, this racism pandemic. The first option is the easiest road to take. And that is to simply say, racism is true. That black folks truly are inferior to white. The reason that those statistics bear themselves out the way they do is that black people are lazy. They're prone to crime. They're not as smart as us. Their bodies aren't capable of withstanding the same things that we can. Racism is true. That's the first option. That doesn't seem very appealing to me. Number two, they are liars. They are lying to us. They have actually made up this whole thing. They've concocted it, and we are being duped. That doesn't seem very appealing to me either. The third option is these black folks are just being deceived. They have deceived themselves. They think something is happening that's not really. That truly, we're all equal. We all have the same advantages. That doesn't seem very appealing to me either. The fourth option is that they are absolutely telling the truth, and they have been for hundreds of years. That the system is against them. I watched the show This Is Us. There's an actor on This Is Us. This is not in my notes, but I just saw this morning. Sterling Brown. I don't know his last name. I really didn't intend to say this, but he said he went for a jog and he decided to wear his mask because of COVID. And so he ran a couple miles with his mask on. And he said, I really, really wanted to take that mask off so that my lungs could get the air that they needed while I was running. It's really, really hard to run with a mask on. And he said, I realized that running with a mask on is a metaphor for the black life. He said, my entire life, I feel like I have had a mask on. that makes it difficult for me to breathe, to live, and to function, to do the things that I want to do. I think he's telling the truth. I don't think he's lying. I don't think he's deceived. I really believe that his experience is not the same as my experience. Brothers and sisters, my eyes are open, or they are beginning to open, and I cannot go back. I can never go back to where I was. I can't sit complacently as if nothing is happening in the country. Something is happening. And I want to learn about my privilege and use it to free those who are oppressed. I believe that we are in a time in our country in which God is awakening the white heart and mind. We have had what's called great awakenings in our country before. I think this could be the beginning of a third great awakening, if we will allow the Spirit to do the work that needs to be done. And I believe that our very salvation lies in the balance in this moment in history. My eyes have been opened. And I believe with heartfelt sincerity that Black lives matter to God. And because they matter to God, as a follower of Jesus Christ, they must matter to me as well. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.